Have y'all ever had a crash out and realized that you're starting to act like your dad? Or anyone generally that you used to despise as a kid? You swore you're never going to grow up like them and boom, you realize you're showing some of their traits. Yeah, that's the horror we're unpacking today.
Hello, dear children. Hope you didn't get a jump scare from our precious script writer's voice. But hey, it is another beautiful day to yap about a character I'm hyper-fixated on, which is Hugo Vlad. I don't want to waste any more time, so let's get right into it. And as usual, as a disclaimer, this video is not meant to dictate how you should view the character, but rather open new perspectives in the discussion revolving around them. I also want to personally mention that Hugo himself is a deeply well-layered character, and this video alone is not enough to explain everything about him. As much as I want to, I can only discuss one particular main theme about him. That's the most I can manage with the time I have. I would also highly recommend watching my previous discussion about Hugo and Lycaon first if you haven't, as it provides more depth to our understanding of today's discussion. Previously, I discussed his childhood and how it shaped his beliefs and worldview. I also talked more in depth about Mockingbird and how it led to its tragedy. But of course, we'll have a quick recap of his history and what led to us on the current timeline. Hugo Vlad was born from a relationship that was never meant to last. His mother's affair with the head of the Ravenlock family was brief and opportunistic, but somehow, whatever future she imagined fell apart, and her resentment turned towards Hugo. She didn't see him as a son. Rather, she sold him off to the Ravenlock. Hugo's life in the Ravenlock household didn't improve. He was an outsider with the Ravenlock name and was never treated as part of the family. Everyone around him treated him with contempt. His half-siblings, born into privilege and security, saw him as nothing more than a threat to their inheritance, a bastard child who didn't belong. Their cruelty wasn't subtle. They took every chance they had to try and get rid of him. Yes, literally trying to kill him. But Hugo was a smart kid and was able to escape from their attempts. It didn't help that the family patriarch encouraged the competition. Every month, the children were ranked. Whoever stood at the top was one step closer to being chosen as the family's true heir, and those who didn't were punished. When violence didn't work, they turned to manipulation. The chance came with Serena's untimely death, the only person who had ever treated Hugo with genuine care. When she was found dead, they framed him for it, twisting the situation to make him look like the culprit. But the outcome didn't go the way they planned. Hugo wasn't punished, he was praised. His father believed that he had finally shown the cruelty and ambition expected of a Ravenlock heir. It was the first time Hugo received approval, not for being loyal or kind or good, but for being ruthless. Soon after, he then ran away from home to escape from that twisted family, and that's where he met Lycaon and their mentor, Jack. After Jack's passing, Hugo and Lycaon together built Mockingbird, a resistance to challenge the unjust system in society. However, a betrayal and the breaking of a shared oath led to Mockingbird's greatest setback, ultimately causing Hugo and Lycaon to part ways. In the latest epilogue chapter, the bigger picture becomes clear. The Exaltists were developing a pro-max version of sacrifices, people who were turned into ethereals that could be controlled through a mind-altering drug. Basically, programmable weapons that follow orders from their creators. Meanwhile, the Ravenlocks had been secretly helping the Exaltists with the underlying motive to secure their place in tops. The plan was to unleash these things on the city, make it look like the mayor failed to stop the threat, and let tops swoop in as the so-called heroes. All of this was just a setup to grab more power and political control over New Eridu. To stop it, Hugo initiates a tangled scheme involving Tops, the Exaltists, the Ravenlock family, and even the Mayflowers, which is basically the mayor. It all leads to him faking his own death, a stunt he pulls off with Lycaon's help. But I think what's really important to understand is that from all these political backflips, trust me, it's crazy. The game had to recap Hugo's plans at least twice. What's actually driving Hugo to do any of this? Well, we can first look at it this way. The principle of Mockingbird has always been about justice, to tilt the balance, taking from the rich and giving it back to the poor. In this mission, Hugo is targeting the Ravenlocks, exposing corruption, helping the mayor and taking down the Exaltists. From the outside, it looks noble, heroic even. But there is another side that has finally revealed itself.
Hugo, you are taking such a tremendous risk. Why?
Would you believe me if I said it's for justice?
The way he says it, it's almost sarcastic, like he's holding up the very idea of justice and asking, do you still buy this? Because I don't. And this is pivotal to the topic I want to discuss about him today. In our previous discussion, we talked about how Hugo once believed in the idea that sometimes one life must be taken to save many, and that sacrificing a single evil for the sake of the greater good was a justifiable moral act. It was that belief that led him to try and kill his cruel father, thinking that removing a monster like him would protect countless innocent people. But beneath this ideal was a buried truth of him making sense of his own pain.
But unfortunately, it's not. I want revenge on the Ravenlock family. And I will make sure that despicable excuse for a human being, Hartman, suffers a slow, torturous end. Of course, I also promised Vivian that I would help her investigate the whole thing with the Exaltists. That's all.
This very scene shows that Hugo's finally dropping the act, that everything he's done has been about control, not healing, that he's still angry, hurt, and tired of pretending to be the hero. When he shrugs and says, that's all, it sounds like resignation, like even he knows this won't fix anything, but he's doing it anyway. But at the same time, it's also the most honest he's ever been. Of course, it was never just about revenge, especially in the beginning where it all began. Back then, when he stood alongside Lycaon and founded Mockingbird, he really did believe they were fighting for something bigger. He believed they could fix a broken system. But when you trace it back to where that belief began, it always pointed to his trauma. He never truly processed them. Instead, he externalized them. The rage he never allowed himself to express became righteous fury. The shame he carried became a war against the world that made him feel that way. In this view, Mockingbird becomes less a resistance movement and more a projection of suppressed identity. And he used the language of justice to keep from saying what he really felt. I was hurt, and I don't know what to do with that. At one point, even Hugo began to doubt whether Mockingbird had truly accomplished anything at all, but came to acknowledge that it still has value. Hugo did fight for justice. He did help people. He challenged the unjust system no matter how flawed it was. But it's also true that Mockingbird became a monument to one man's inability to sit with his grief. So yes, Hugo built something great, but it started as something very small. A boy who didn't want to feel helpless anymore. When purpose is stitched from pain, and your fight becomes louder than your hurt, what happens when that pain goes unheard for too long? The answer is exactly what led to the biggest setback of Mockingbird, a movement built on a dream that was never fully separated from the wounds it came from. In the last video, we focused on how Hugo was seen and how the world calls him a villain. And for the longest time, he played along as the necessary evil. Not because he believed it, but because it gave him control. But when the world keeps labeling him as evil, he starts to wonder where the line really is. Where does his justice end and his vengeance begin? And if his cause was born from pain, does that make it any less righteous? Or has it always just been personal? And this long uncertainty was unveiled to us in his first re-encounter with Lycaon after faking his death. So this time, it's different. This isn't about how others see him. It's about the part of himself he's spent his whole life trying to silence. I know it's a pretty bold claim to say Mockingbird was built from Hugo's pain. A movement born from suffering, designed to take back control. So now, we're going to explore more deeply how that buried pain shaped the very structure of the movement itself, and eventually how Hugo is forced to confront it. This is where we start to see him search for an answer, not in some redemption arc, but in a locked room, alone, with nothing left to distract him from himself. But before we delve further into what Hugo was actually facing in that locked room, we need to talk about the kind of thing he was really confronting. One way to understand this moment is through the idea of the shadow. And no, not in the anime final boss alter ego way. I mean this in the Jungian sense. The shadow offers a powerful way to interpret what's happening here. Now, I know this sounds like I'm about to assign homework, but stay with me. It's going to make some sense to us soon. Keep in mind, this is an oversimplified explanation, and I will only talk the parts that are relevant to us here. For those not familiar with Carl Jung, he proposed that the human psyche isn't just made of what we consciously think and feel. In fact, most of who we are, which is our thoughts, desires, impulses, lies beneath awareness. Jung divided the psyche into three parts: the conscious mind, the personal unconscious, and the collective unconscious. The conscious mind is exactly what it sounds like, the part of you that thinks, plans, and acts. At the center of it is the ego, the I in your head that narrates your life. It gives you a sense of identity. Surrounding that is the persona, the version of yourself you present to the world. It's curated. However, it's definitely not the full picture about who you truly are. Then there's the unconscious, the part of the psyche that holds everything we've pushed out of awareness. According to Jung, the ego is shaped by what society or the people around us tell us is acceptable or valuable. So to maintain that identity, we wear a mask, the persona. It's the version of ourselves we present to the world. But here's the trade-off. Everything that doesn't fit that image gets shoved into the shadow, deep in the unconscious part of us. And that's not just bad traits, like anger, guilt, or shame. It's also strength we were told was dangerous, vulnerability we were told was weak, creativity we were told was useless. Anything the ego can't or won't acknowledge gets buried. So the shadow isn't just the ugly side of you, it's the unclaimed side of you, a mix of fears, desires, instincts, and forgotten truths that still shape your behavior, especially when you're not realizing. Here's where it gets important. Jung didn't think healing was about erasing the dark parts. The shadow isn't some demon you exorcise, it's you, just the parts you've been too scared to own out of fear or denial. Because the more you try to ignore it, the more it finds other ways to be seen, whether through projection, self-sabotage, in your bad decisions, your weird overreactions, or that one meltdown you swear wasn't that deep, and even people of the similar red flags you keep attracting. Eventually, as these dark parts remain suppressed, they start shaping how we see the world. For Hugo, the parts he rejected most became the very things that defined his path.
You know, perhaps the person I hate the most, the one I truly cannot forgive, has never been someone else, but rather my weak, powerless past self who could do nothing but hide inside a closet and cry. I hate myself for having neither the strength nor the courage to resist. I hate myself for begging for so-called familial love, even after being treated so terribly. I hate that despite the pain of my wounds, I still hope to receive the carrot and not the stick.
This is one of the most raw and painful moments of Hugo's entire character, because it's not aimed at the Ravenlocks nor his mother. It's about himself, the part of him that felt pathetic, small, and powerless, crying in secret and still wanted to be loved, even by people who hurt him. That version of Hugo was shoved into the shadow, locked away in shame. But rejection didn't erase those feelings. It amplified them. Over time, that longing turned into self-disgust. And to survive, Hugo taught himself one thing: never show that part again.
The truth is, I heard everything. That entire conversation between you and Jack. before he passed away in that small attic. When Jack called you aside and gave you those warnings.
When he told me you might go down the wrong path?
That's right.
You never said anything.
What would I even do? Scream and rage over your suspicions, or get on my knees and beg for you to trust me? You know there's no way I'd allow myself to do such a thing. Besides, back then, even I was confused about myself.
The world pins him as evil because of his bloodline. It seems easier to play along a given role, taking the blame for killing his father, even though he didn't. It was a lesson he learned growing up, that playing the villain gave him more power than being seen as a victim. It's why he never begs for understanding, why he never explains himself when people accuse him. His past taught him that vulnerability doesn't earn sympathy. It just opens the door to more pain. Despite Jack's unfair convictions, that early confusion was the signal, the first quiet sign that he was beginning to lose confidence in who he thought he was. But instead of facing that pain directly, he turns it outward, because that's where projection comes in. When you don't allow yourself to feel something, you start seeing it everywhere else, in others and the world around you. So for Hugo, cruelty and injustice didn't just anger him, they triggered him. They weren't just wrong, they were personal. Systems that trampled the weak reminded him of what he once was. People who abused their power looked like the people who once had power over him. And instead of acknowledging his rage, his resentment, and his longing for revenge, he dismissed it because he was terrified of becoming like his father, the kind of man who used cruelty to preserve power. So he wrapped it in justice and what directed him to build Mockingbird. And in that sense, every act of justice he carried out wasn't just about protecting others. It was also a way to fight back against the ghosts of his past. Punishing the elite wasn't just a mission, it was a release, a way to reclaim power, to get revenge on a world that once made him feel small, helpless, and disposable. But the more he denied that part of himself, the more it took root in the dark. It's important to clarify that Mockingbird's origin in Hugo's pain doesn't invalidate its cause. A movement can come from suffering and still be righteous. In fact, many of the most powerful acts of resistance in history were born from trauma, from people who refused to stay powerless. The problem isn't that Hugo externalized his pain. The real issue here is that he refused to admit that's what it was. Over time, the mission became a mask to avoid facing the grief, the rage, and the weakness buried beneath. And when you stay in that comfort long enough, when you convince yourself the cause is all that matters, the truth starts to rot underneath. That's what leads to the pivotal moment, the attempted patricide. The moment Hugo tries to kill his father is the first real fracture in the image he's built of himself. He's convinced himself that removing a monster like his father is necessary, that this is how you protect others. But when the moment comes, he hesitates. And that hesitation says everything. It's not just mercy. It's the horrifying realization that the part of him he's buried, the part that wants to punish and destroy, almost took over. His shadow nearly stepped in. He thought he was in control, but the truth is, he was still running from the part of himself that he rejected the most, which led to even more pain and regret. Standing in front of the man who made him suffer, the line starts to blur, and it terrifies him. Because if his actions are rooted in vengeance, if his shadow has been steering him all along, then maybe he's not the deliverer of justice he imagined. Maybe he's just another Ravenlock, swallowed by the same cruelty he swore to fight. This was a moment of realization that he can't kill his shadow. It's always been there, and it always will be. In the end, Hugo's not just a revolutionary. He's someone who built a movement so he wouldn't have to admit he was still bleeding. Because fixing the world won't fix him, and no amount of resistance will replace the healing he never touched. This takes us back to Hugo in that locked room, where Hugo goes to therapy, except not really. In the story, what he's actually doing is locking himself up in a warehouse to face the accumulated effects of the mind-altering drug Hartman gave him. Now, I'm not a chemist. I don't know the exact science behind whatever drug the Exaltists cooked up. But what matters is what it brings out of him. Everything that finally surfaces when he has no choice but to sit with himself. Every suppressed emotion returns. The resentment toward his mother, the guilt over Serena, the helplessness of being a powerless child, the rage, the shame he's carried alone. And we have to understand this ultimately, that none of this is real, at least not in the literal sense. These aren't actual conversations with people he met in his hallucination, whether it was his mother, Serena, Hartman, or Lycaon, but buried fragments of how Hugo remembers them, or more accurately, denied inner beliefs of how they see him. They're internalized truths that he never allowed himself to process, not because they were accurate, but because they felt real enough to hurt.
Enough. I'm tired. I may hate him for betraying me, but he wouldn't say something like that.
What?
You aren't Lycaon. You're the other me, hidden deep within my heart.
In this sense, the inner demon doesn't manipulate or fabricate anything. It is him, stripped bare, the shadow. It is every unwanted thought, repressed desire, and unbearable truth Hugo has spent a lifetime avoiding. This is the moment he stops projecting his pain outward and finally turns to face it.
I've been waiting for you, my dear.
It seems you've already grown accustomed to this place, even turning the tables on me.
Just as you said, you are me, and I am you. There's no such thing as having an advantage over oneself. We are ultimately one and the same, forever inseparable.
You would notice how he listens to it without judging or rationalizing them, and crucially, to reclaim them and forgive himself for the fear that these feelings made him monstrous, because they actually didn't. They only meant he was human, and in doing so, he begins to strip them of their power. They're no longer running the show, just shadows on the wall, finally seen for what they are.
Without me, you are nothing.
For what it's worth, thank you. Don't be afraid. You and I are inseparable. You're part of me, just as I am part of you.
Fancy words won't change anything.
No. It's not just platitudes. I finally understand now. Some pain only fades when it's seen, when it's accepted. So I won't fight you anymore. I won't hate myself anymore. Weakness, hatred, malice, strength, forgiveness, justice.
This scene reflects the act of acknowledging your shadow, a key aspect of what Jung called individuation, the process of being whole. And no, it's not about becoming some enlightened guru. It's about becoming real and just human. It means dragging all those hidden parts and saying, yeah, this is me too. And this is such a convincing notion because you can't heal what you won't even admit exists.
I did have a very long dream. A dream about many things from the past. If I had to put it into words, it would be like giving myself psychological therapy. You seem like you could benefit from some too. How about it? Want to book a session with me? Trust me, I'm a pro.
Seems you really have recovered.
So where does this leave us? Well, there's no redemption arc waiting with open arms. But what we do see is something more honest. One of the most deeply human aspects of Hugo's character is the pain of being shaped by those who hurt you and the strength it takes to live in opposition to that legacy. Hugo's story isn't just about trauma. It's about inheritance, identity, and the long, exhausting process of trying not to become what you were taught.
I once wanted to fight against those ugly truths that defined me, but I discovered that the more I rejected them, the more painful it became. So I could only accept that crazed, hateful, and malicious side of myself. As long as I know I will never become like my father, like Hartman, that is enough for me.
What makes Hugo's arc so powerful is that he eventually understands how deeply they have become a part of him. The pain lies in the fact that these behaviors once kept him alive, but now threaten to define him. His internal conflict isn't just about denying the darkness within him, but also deciding what role it will play in his life. Will he continue to operate the way he was taught, which is to dominate or be dominated, hurt or be hurt? Or will he make the painful choice to live differently? This is where Hugo's self-awareness becomes crucial. He knows he cannot erase the parts of himself that were shaped by cruelty, but he also understands that acknowledging them does not mean submitting to them.
I thought you wanted the power to pass judgment on all in this world like a god.
I am a god. I am my own god. Or you could say that in this world, everyone is their own god. There are many things that we are powerless to change. But there are also many choices we can make.
That choice reaches its peak in his final confrontation. Instead of delivering the vengeance he once believed would bring closure through bloodshed, he dismantles the Ravenlocks by taking away what they valued most, which is power. And he does it the way Mockingbird was always meant to, through subversion rather than violence. He exposes Hartman and topples the family's status in front of the world.
You still don't get it, do you? This was never about avenging my father. And I don't care about taking your place. I didn't come this far just to kill you. That'd be pathetic.
He's not just humiliating his uncle, but also drawing a line between who he used to be and who he's decided to become. In that moment, the vengeance Hugo once buried under ideals isn't gone, but it's transformed. The whole mastermind sort of sums up that Hugo isn't here to repeat the legacy of violence he was born into. He's here to end it. The ultimate takeaway from this chapter is that seeking justice and seeking revenge can look almost identical on the surface, but the motivation behind them is what splits them apart. Justice is supposed to be about restoring balance, making things right, and ideally it's driven by a sense of morality. Meanwhile, revenge is personal. It's about making someone feel your pain, about taking back power you lost. Hugo is the perfect example of how justice and revenge can coexist, and how easily that line can blur. It's a dangerous balance, like holding fire and water in the same hand. If you don't acknowledge the part of you that just wants to burn it all down, the fire takes over. However, Hugo's also proof that you can redirect that fire, channel it into something meaningful without losing yourself in the process.
Oh, Uncle. Allow me to reintroduce myself. I'm the name people whisper about. The one who robs the rich and gives to the poor. I'm the master con artist who can fool anyone, anytime. I'm the leader of Mockingbird. The one who turns every headline into my own stage. I have friends who'd catch me if I fall, partners who'd shed tears for me, and allies who always have my back. I am Hugo Vlad. You're the one who needs the Ravenlock name. I never did.
And that final reintroduction, it's a statement of selfhood. For the first time, he defines himself by the people who love him, the cause he's chosen, and the version of himself he's finally accepted. It's him reclaiming the parts he once rejected, the need for connection, trust, even vulnerability, all the things he once saw as weakness, now worn like armor. And I bet some of you want me to talk a little more about Hugo and Lycaon's relationship after all that happened recently. Zestiness, aside, whether divorced or not, I guess the best way to put it is that their reconciliation came from recognition rather than a resolution. Neither of them walks away fully absolved or healed. Hugo's still petty of Lycaon's betrayal, and that he would reject him gracefully if he were to come back to Mockingbird. But for the first time, the weight between them is acknowledged. Their paths remain different, but they begin to coexist without pretending they're the same like they did before. The tension between them softens, not because the past is erased, but because Hugo finally confronts it. In doing so, he makes space for something Lycaon can walk beside through mutual recognition. Their bond is no longer built on unspoken expectations, but rather a shared understanding that healing doesn't always mean harmony. It just means being honest and choosing to stay anyway.
You've changed, but I think that might be a good thing.
Don't patronize me. You've changed a lot too, compared to before. I still disagree with Jack's words, and I won't forgive your betrayal. I will walk the path I believe is right, even if I must tread over thorns and through the mud. But I will also allow you to walk your own path, Lycaon.
And the truth is, their relationship dynamic is more common to us than you think. How many of our relationships are complicated as hell, the ones where we still care, but there's a knot of resentment that never quite untangles, where the past isn't forgiven, but it's not enough to walk away either. And in reality, not everyone has the luxury to walk away. We're probably still tied to people who hurt us, whether by blood, by circumstance, by shared history. Hugo and Lycaon reflect how every bond cannot be neatly repaired. Sometimes it's not about forgiveness, but learning how to coexist with parts that still ache without pretending they're healed. That's probably the most realistic kind of reconciliation there is. In a real-world sense, Hugo's story speaks to anyone who's ever wrestled with the parts of themselves they were told to suppress. We're all shaped by our past and our upbringings, whether by what we were praised for, punished for, or taught to hide. And over time, those experiences form the blueprint of who we think we're allowed to be. Maybe you grew up being told that anger was bad, or that needing attention made you selfish. But it's not just feelings. It could also be a certain passion or talent you have, but weren't appreciated the way you hoped it would. So you bury them, but they don't just vanish. They come back as guilt, self-sabotage, or this belief that certain parts of you are unlovable. As you start filtering your personality, that gap between who you truly are and who you're performing to be gets harder to ignore. And we start to have doubts about ourselves, being constantly unsatisfied and unable to live our life to its fullest. And just like Hugo, this suppression shapes how we see others and affects our relationships. We start projecting these unacknowledged feelings onto the world, and especially in the way we judge others. The best example is how so many people today seem constantly on edge, getting irrationally angry at a stranger's comment, blowing up over a difference in opinion, or needing to prove they're morally superior. It's not just outrage, it's displaced pain. Probably, most of us were taught to bottle up our own hurt, so now we explode when someone mirrors a part of us we've disowned. We get so hypersensitive, so easily triggered by things that don't even affect us directly. You think you're mad at that influencer for being too much? Maybe you're just mad that you were never allowed to be loud. You think that person's selfish for prioritizing themselves? Or does it just hit something in you that was always told to put others first? The shadow twists our perception until we're not really reacting to the world. We're reacting to ourselves. Because when we're so easily angry at the world or people around us, perhaps it's not a moment to touch grass, but to touch ourselves. I mean, sit with our thoughts for a second. What is it that I have not accepted about myself? We can justify ourselves however we want, but deep down, we're the only ones who know when we're lying to ourselves. And this, what makes it so painful and difficult, because acknowledging those parts of you, without trying to justify or judge them, whether it's jealousy, bitterness, the need for control, or the desire to be seen, it's not graceful. No, it's ugly and exhausting. I mean, just look at Hugo. Man literally tied himself up in a warehouse, face flushed, sweating, emotionally wrecked, like, yeah, that's probably what shadow work looks like visualized. Jung never said it'd be cute. And the crazy part is that it's a lifelong process you need to do to keep ourselves in check. But then, we also have to realize that having a shadow doesn't make us a monster. Sometimes you just need to listen to it, but you don't need to trust it. And I gotta be real. I can't take it seriously that Hugo's inner demon is represented as a bang-boo. Like, here he is, facing the darkest parts of himself, and the game chooses to personify it as this goofy little mascot. But it's kind of clever to prove the point. The stuff we're so scared to face isn't as terrifying as we make it out to be. And maybe if we actually looked at them, we'd realize they're more ridiculous than monstrous. We're not evil for feeling rage or envy or wanting something we're scared to admit. What makes someone dangerous isn't that they have darkness inside. It's when they refuse to acknowledge it and let it act on their behalf. The real threat is when you convince yourself you have nothing to confront, because then it's not you who's driving anymore. It's everything you've been running from. And yeah, sure, like Hugo, sometimes that running looks productive. You throw yourself into purpose. You chase justice, build movements, save everyone but yourself. And it works for a while, because meaning is a great disguise for avoidance. You think you've outgrown your pain, but really, you've just put it to work. And when the mission becomes a mere facade, even the most righteous cause can start to rot from the inside. That's why you'll sometimes see people trying to save the world at the expense of ever growing as a human being. Because performative morality is easier than actual self-work. It's easier to fight injustice in the streets than to confront the ways you replicate it in your own relationships. You can preach compassion, but never practice it on yourself. Because again, real self-work isn't glamorous. There's no applause for admitting something society would not accept. There's no moral high ground like saying, I act selfless, so no one sees how much I want to be chosen. But that's the work that actually matters. Even for myself, writing this analysis made me think a lot about what I truly want to convey. Like, the truth is, I'm lying to myself if I think this video is revolutionary, because deep down, I know it isn't. I've been raised in a setting where competition is everything, where being the best is the bare minimum, and anything less than exceptional is failure. That mindset made me want to stop writing this video halfway through because it's far from perfection on my standards. But I can't run from that, can I? I gotta acknowledge what I make isn't always mind-blowing. It's not one of those galaxy brain theory essays, and it's definitely not going to please everyone. But I also have to remind myself, that's not the point. If it resonates with even one person, if someone out there sees a part of themselves in Hugo, or just feels a little more seen, then maybe that's enough. And honestly, I want to thank Hugo for that, for being such a mess of a character, for spiraling and pretending and still choosing to try anyway, because maybe that's one of the most honest kind of stories there is. I didn't expect to end this video on a personal note, but I'm glad it did. So here's to each and every one of you who managed to stay in my yap session until the end. If you enjoyed the video, do hit a like and subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.